Well, thank you very much. I was also very excited to come here today. I got to say, a little nervous and intimidated. As much as I was reading the program for this event and realizing that most of the people in the room would be real expert about BPM, I said, well, I'm not. So hopefully I won't say anything completely stupid. And I came up with the concept of the Chief Robotics Officer back in January. Like Nathaniel said, I've been reading a lot of, documents about what robotics will become. Most of them were very futuristic. They were not necessarily making sense. And when I was looking at what the robotics industry was and is today, I realized there's just a gap to be filled between what the technology is, what all those little companies, most of them are startups, are doing, and what the corporate world is wanting. So I came up with a Chief Robotics Officer. I got to say that another challenge I have is this scenario document that I was writing is pretty intense and long. So putting it all together and adding to that BPM over just 30 minutes will be a challenge. So obviously, if you have questions after, come over and please read that document at the end. First thing first, robotics. I'm not very old, but I've been hearing the words for the past 20, 30, 40 years. And I realized whenever I was doing a presentation that I was usually having arguments with people just because nobody was exactly clear on, okay, what do we call exactly robotics? And actually, turned out that I decided to not call that just robotics, but call that RIOS, which stands for Robotics and Intelligent Operating System. If you want to define what I will call RIOS and robotics after, the three things are you just have to imagine a machine, so something working in the real world in 3 dimensions that sense, think, compute, and act. Intelligent system, you have to add to that the communication part with other systems, as well as autonomy, so basically it works on a battery, and mobility, so it turns around by itself and it just goes around by itself, which is not exactly a smart device. A lot of people sometimes call robotics something that I believe is more a smart device, like you have an iPad where you can see yourself and it's on wheels. I don't call that robotics, so just so we're clear. Now, if you look at what the RIOS industry is, it's absolutely uneven. It's actually a small industry, and not everybody is at the same level. The one thing that is really driving right now the adoption of robotics within many companies is because they are moving from what I call back office cost reduction driven, and it's moving to business value oriented. By that I mean, most people, and started especially with the manufacturing industry, when they were thinking robotics, they were thinking integrating machine into processes, manufacturing processes, to cut costs. Let's get less people into the factories. It was working, but wasn't working. When you look at figures, market figures, how big the industry is, it's still rather small, and it wasn't actually picking up. Now, what's working is when we were looking at CEO surveys, and actually that relates also to survey that Forrester was doing on BPM, is whenever a robot could be proven as driving business. In other words, if you use that machine, you will get new clients, you will get market shares, you will actually improve client acquisition. All of a sudden, you start to have the attention from at board level, from CEO and on and on. That said, right now, very honestly, for most of the solution, we're still in this area. So prototypes, specific usage, and single task oriented. This is mostly for manufacturing. Some democratization, some machines are getting more used by others, but still we don't see one platform, whether it's for manufacturing, for consumer space, or healthcare, agro-farming. We don't see one hardware platform that is actually reused amongst community of users. One thing that is badly missing right now in the robotics industry, and we actually forecast that to happen within 2 to 4 years, depending on the subsector, is there is no leader. There is not one Google or one Facebook of the robotics industry. So basically, it's a completely open place. You guys probably heard about like Google's acquiring, robotics company, Amazon acquiring robotics company. Actually, there's a few that I'm working on right now from company that are not even from the IT industry and not even from the robotics industry, who are looking at acquiring robotic solution, trying to make themselves a leader in the industry and bring standards. But that's where we are. Now, if you look at what drives investment in the RIOS industry, I would say the two things that we hear all the time when people actually are willing to do some potential investment is, first, the price of for robotics technology is completely dropping. It is still a problem, by the way, for many small startups who are starting to get into the robotics industry. They usually struggle to fund their company because VCs are looking for return on investment that they cannot offer yet, but still the price for vision system, for sensors, for actuators are dropping, batteries are getting better and better, cheaper as well. So that's one first thing. In the meantime, the increased use of RIOS system bring less need of low qualified headcounts. In exchange of what? It brings a huge need in very high qualified people that, by the way, don't completely exist yet. There's only a very few courses where you can learn how to be a roboticist. As a matter of fact, I was talking with a university next to Boston 2 weeks ago. They were telling me, well, I was telling them, how do you feel about a talent war in the robotics industry? I said, do you think it will actually start? They said, well, it started. They got people getting out of their degrees, getting hired 6 figures, just because there's something written robotics next to a title. It's quite impressive. We do think that the inflection point really when this will start to happen on a large-scale basis between 2, 3, 4 years. I cannot be very precise on that because it obviously depends much on what you do with a robotic system. So for manufacturing, we're already there. For the agro-farming industry, it's more like 2, 3 years ahead. For the consumer space, we're almost there. Now another thing, I was talking before about robotics moving to being considered front office. So basically, robotics helping my company to generate business. We were asking and using figures from all over the market and saying, so how do you spend your money? And how would you relate that to robotics if it comes to actually helping your business? Turned out that through that little survey, we discovered that the market potential for robotics was huge and about to happen because about 37% of what we call technology budget, which are not necessarily, by the way, IT budget or telco budget. That could also be technology related to what a certain industry is doing. For instance, for the healthcare industry, it can be, okay, the money I spend on surgery system. So we realized that we had a global average of $7 to $8 trillion spent every year on what those people were calling technology budget. And on anything that was done to build and transform the business, they were actually willing to go for robotics and to use that money, not anymore necessarily for IT. I mean, they will still do that for IT or for other proprietary technologies, but most of them, when we were asking, would you be willing to spend almost all that on robotics? Answer was yes from a large corporation. This is why we forecast that the RIOS industry, and by that, I think Nathaniel was saying it before, I am not just talking about hardware. So don't just think about the robot itself, but all the software that goes into it, all the service that goes into implementing those solutions within different applications will actually reach $320 billion in about 5 years and $1.2 trillion in 10 years. Actually, about a week ago, McKinsey came up with a figure because when I came up with that first, people told me, you're completely crazy. It's an industry that is just doing like $65 billion. You will never reach $1.2 trillion. McKinsey a week ago said 1.5 trillion. So I'm glad we think alike. Now if you look at different vertical sector and how it impacts robotics, I created that chart because I was annoyed by people calling robotic disruptive. I said, robotic is not necessarily disruptive. Or why is robotic disruptive? two things usually were coming up when we're talking with clients. First thing was, what sort of real business impact will robotics has on my small business? So is that, will I have to completely transform, my staff? Is that about labor displacement? Will I get new clients? Do I have to rethink all my business processes? Yes, no. Manufacturing is clearly in advance. That's where most robots are used today, but sectors such as healthcare are getting completely shaken up by robotics right now. There's also quite a level of change management capabilities that company needs to have. And by the way, this relates a lot to BPM. I will talk about that later, but right now, when I talk to corporations, when I talk to robotics vendors, I think over the course of the past years, I've heard BPM probably 3 times. Nobody includes BPM practitioners into their development of robotics or implementation of robotics. It's more, hey, I will implement that. You BPM guys, you just deal with it now. That's how it happens. So this is very much a very high level point of view on robotics. And I'm trying to cover here every possible solutions. So not just manufacturing, healthcare as well, energy, oil, gas, mining, and everything. Usually, it starts with, by using robotics, many tasks are divided differently. This is very true. This is usually the base of everything. If you divide tasks differently, then you have to completely rethink, obviously, your labor deployment. Actually, do you still need labor? What sort of labor do you need? If you do that, then you actually start to modify your business structure. But if you modify your business structure, then you completely change the way you spend money internally. I was saying before, robotics was back office, so it was mostly operation budget that were actually funding robotics. All of a sudden, it's business development budget that are funding robotics. So it changed the balance on how people are spending money. Then obviously that changed the economic architecture, which changed as well all the business model. So is where do I put my money to actually make money? And because of a revised business model, you start to make money differently. All the revenue models are completely shaken up. Like, to give you an example, for the healthcare industry, right now, you would pay, insurance or yourself would pay, or social security would pay, say you do a surgery, you would pay or get reimbursed based on the surgery. Now, some robotics company are offering to actually, hey, get my surgical robots. I want to get paid based on how fast people will recover. If they recover very fast, I want more money. This is how they get paid. And this is how the hospital now has to charge you. So it differentiates completely the customer engagement. The value proposition for customers, for customers of end users, become slightly different. It's not too much, hey, I will just feel your pain, is I will do it faster, I will do it better. So again, robotics become more front office, very involved with marketing people. That enhances a lot client acquisition. On client acquisition, I think one of the best example I have out of today is the Amazon case. Amazon, who acquired Kiva System about 3 years ago. Kiva System is a robotics company based out of Boston. What they do is they just do like mobile platform that goes into warehouses and that just like put together your order. So you're on Amazon, you place an order, that does that for you. I was touching base with Amazon and said, originally, why did you guys do that? Everybody thought, well, this is because, like labor costs a lot in my warehouse. This wasn't the case. Absolutely not. They acquired that company because they wanted to place such a big order that first, it was better to acquire the company. But what they told me was simple. I said, we're an e-commerce company. Today, if you buy something online, a pen, tap pen on Google, you will get 10 different offers from different vendors. How do you make a decision on which one you will get? Pricing are more or less the same, unless you buy something from a weird vendor in China maybe, but they're more or less the same. The difference is how fast can this pen be delivered. So basically, client acquisition is very much linked on how fast you do that. So by automating all your processes around how fast you deliver, how do you link your CRM when somebody places an order into all the supply chain things, and how do I deliver, that is actually where they want to change their process for client acquisition. And obviously, yeah, I was just talking about it, transform delivery management. So we made a little prediction. We said that by 2025, 60% of at least manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, energy, agro-farming corporation with revenue over $1 billion, and $1 billion, just to say sizable company, will include a chief robotic officer and the staff within their company. Somebody will have to take care of that. Now there are three forces that drive the chief robotic officer and all the staff to come up into companies. The first one is financial. So far, when you look at corporations, and there's not so many of them that have actually deployed robotics in a large scale, it was fine. It was R&D budget, little operation budget here and there, sometimes marketing just to have a cool message and saying, hey, we use robots. Great. Now, when you start to actually implement robotics at a large scale, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. Somebody has to be responsible for that. In the meantime, I was talking before, there's a different revenue generation model. Somebody has to put that together. There's also the operational part. So I was talking about labor displacement. There's integration with other corporate systems. Some of them relate to BPM. Huge specialization of the staff in charge of robotics. I was talking about talent war before. Deployment complexity. Again, if you just think about, hey, let's put a robot here, it's fairly simple. It's not simple, but fairly simple. Now, how do I integrate my robotic solution with a CRM, with my client care system, with everything? That's starting to be fairly complex. And actually, as much as today we have electromechanical engineers in charge of robotics, none of them is necessarily into BPM. None of them is necessarily into IT. Those people have to talk together. Chief Robotic Officer and his staff will be in charge of that. And then obviously the transformational part, which is more, like new ecosystem. I don't know exactly as of today how many companies are doing robots and robotics. It's actually growing so fast and it's changing all the time, but probably in the area of 2,000 worldwide. So how do you decide with whom you work and which one does what? There's a lot of companies transforming themselves to actually move into robotics. A lot of IT services companies are moving into robotics right now. Capgemini in Europe, Accenture has projects, all the Indian pure players have projects. They all want to move to robotics. So how do you deal with all those people? Ready to partner with your Chief Robotic Officer. I came up with the Chief Robotic Officer concept because it was 2 years ago. I was at another conference, IT conference, and they wanted me to talk about robotics. And those people basically told me, well, in one of your slides, you have to say that because robotics is very much linked to IT, it's kind of the same, which is not untrue. It's like mobile processing, if you like robotics, if you simplify it, then of course it should be with IT. IT will take care of that. At another conference, it was a marketing conference, CMOs told me, well, robotics, because it changed the way the perception people will have of our company, because of labor displacement problem, we kind of should be in charge of that. Same for sales. Sales said, well, can we make money out of robots? Or thanks to robots, can we open new channels? Yes, well, so we should be in charge of that. So again, the Chief Robotic Officer is very conceptual. Actually, that doesn't exist yet. I've heard 3 times the title, and that was at vendors. And they call themselves Chief Robotic Officer instead of Chief Technology Officers. However, in many end-user companies, you will have a VP of Advanced Automation. You will have somebody in charge and not completely in charge of all that. All those people will have to work together with that person. That will become very central. So, and as the time goes, and we start to see that, boards of directors are getting interested. There's a lot of corporate risk by using robotics. Like, do I make the right investment? What will people think about me? Do we do all that? So, interestingly enough, it moved from a quite low level to directly jumps to the top to get back down. Now, talking with clients, large end-user corporation, Not all of them, by the way, use robotics. We were asking, so if we define a chief robotic officer this way, so somebody in charge of robotics, of integrating that and integrating it within the entire company, do you think you will get one? This is also where I started with these documents, is by doing that little survey, when I realized that on average 60% of the company would be not just willing, but would see that as strategic and mandatory to have a chief robotic officer or that sort of staff. Say, okay, so some industries are going slightly faster, manufacturing and logistics. This is mostly due by the fact that robotic solution already exists for those two sectors and are slightly more advanced already. But agro-farming, healthcare, and everything, they are moving there. Also, they're moving there for another reason, and many people were telling me before, yeah, robots, they will replace humans. This is not true. This is not where robots works. Actually, in most sectors, people consider using robots because there's a labor shortage. If you look at the agro-farming industry, they cannot find people who actually would do the job. They just don't exist anymore. Same for manufacturing. If you look at China, I was in Shenzhen area 2 months ago, asking a small factory, say, so how do you hire people? I said, well, we don't find them anymore. This is why we need robots now. So it's not just a question of replacing people. It's to replace them, but not for the same reason. Now, all chief robotic officers won't play the same role in the organization, depending on the subsector. Actually, it depends much on what robotics will do for those sectors. Impact on top line or bottom line, is that linked to a specific business unit, or is that across the entire business, that core business? Yes, no. Within the next 4 to 6 years, I personally don't think that we'll see much chief robotic officer that will be part of growth and innovation. So basically, chief robotic officer that would be as important as CIOs right now for the IT industry, and we'll see that at the board level and make strategic decision. There will be some in some very aggressive company, but that's not where we see them right now. Most of them for logistic and manufacturing will be more in efficiency and effectiveness. So robotics will help core business, but still robotics will be seen as, yeah, let's cut costs. Like we'll see later if we can actually drive business with that. For the healthcare industry, we'll actually have 2 types of chief robotic officer, and I don't actually think that we'll see the actual title. One in incremental improvement for what I was describing at all the say surgery system. This is very top line. We make money thanks to that, but this is really linked to one small size of what say an hospital can be. There will also be some people in the tactical corner for the healthcare industry. You probably heard, and I got 1 or 2 examples after of like robots replacing nurse to just bring you food or medics or something like that. Those people will be more tactical. But again, overall, growth and innovation in some industry only. What I was just saying. So, chief robotic officer becoming as strategic as CIOs, yes, it will happen. 5 to 8 years. 5 years for manufacturing and logistics, 8 years for the other one, and not everybody. Just some examples, and there are many actually. So this is Kiva system. I think that was on one of your slides actually. This is what is called, and I will talk about that after. It's called cobots, collaborative robots. Don't get mistaken, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have an interaction with the robots. Cobots, I think the name is actually not the best name for those solutions. The idea was to say for arms like this, for manufacturing application and actually other application, there have been a big change in the norms. Prior to that, if you had a robot in a factory, you had to have some sort of hardware stop, like a stop button or something like that. And if somebody was getting in close contact to a robot, the robot should slow down or stop. It was very complicated to implement, and this is where all those robots were actually in cages. Now you can actually have software-driven alarm button or something like that. So it has reduced considerably the size of robots, and that has made them much, much, much cheaper. By cheaper, I mean an old industrial robots the TCO was between $200,000 and $300,000 for just one. Those guys cost, the TCO is between 40 and 50K on them. So you divide that by like 6, 7, 8 or something like that. This is a solution for the agrofarming industry, just about like, small mobile thing that will just move pots around just so they get on the sun. Again, this company has been funded and get more funds right now simply because just, go to the client and said, we did that for you. How do you hire people? Well, we don't, again. We don't find them. All right, get a robot to do that. On the bottom left, that's it's a robot called Pepper. Pepper has been created by a Japanese company called SoftBank. So it's not a bank for those of you who don't know that. It's a telco company. They actually acquired Aldebaran in France, so the now robot belongs to them too. They're coming up with another solution. That robot actually is being deployed in Japan in the SoftBank stores, as well as, missing the name, this company we sell coffee machine, Nescafe or something, Nespresso or something like that. Basically, it's for customer interaction. You come there, you don't have a physical person talking to you, it's a robot. The base of it is not just to serve you and being on the screen, like you were saying, Etienne, before, is there's a bunch of sensors that will actually read the expression on your face, giving you a price, you like it or not. If I can see that you don't like the price, well, maybe I can find an arrangement for you or something, or sell you something else. So it's really direct, it's improving client interaction. The one on the top left is actually a robot that goes into hospital and delivers like food or anything to patients. Just a very few of the many examples that exist. Now let's work on a specific example on cobots. So originally, cobots were meant to fill a gap. So what was happening is, well, there were many robotic solutions, industrial robotic solutions that were existing, but like I said, they were extremely expensive. So if you were, say, a car manufacturer, you could potentially afford to have an entire line of robots building your cars. But that wasn't possible if you were just, a small company trying to build only like a few hundred devices or something. So cobots came there. But the gap definition, if you notice, is not linked to BPM at all. It wasn't a question of, okay, how do I integrate a robot into a process? It was just mainly like, we just need something cheaper and something easier to use. But now, cobots are expanding their footprint. They're expanding their footprint because, like I just said, they're much easier to deploy, they're much faster. When I say easier to deploy is, you don't even need to know how to code to move the robots. There's actually a solution where you don't even have a screen in front of you. You take the arm of the robot and you take it with you, pick something. The robot will tell you, okay, I got a sensor that tells me what you wanted me to pick is red and round. Is that what I need to pick? Yes. And then you put it there. That's it. My grandma could do that. You don't need anymore to have roboticists or anybody to actually make those robots work. It is working, cobots. There's more and more sold instead of classic industrial robots. I mean, currently we're only talking a few thousand per year, but the current market forecast on that, like within 3-4 years, will move up to like 100,000 per year because they integrate extremely well in business processes. The funny part is, and I was again working with a client who is looking maybe at an acquisition of a cobot company, BPM practitioners were never part of the equation. I was talking to, let's call it a SVP of business development, who was just trying to expand their business. When I said, well, how do you integrate that? We don't care. They will just take care of that later. We don't even want to hear about that. If we bring BPM practitioner into the equation, well, you know what? I think this acquisition will never happen. And I think it will be so complicated what we'll come up with that, no, let's keep them outside. This is a fact. One process at a time, it's dead. Like I was describing before, hopefully, and this is slightly controversial. I was bringing that up saying, okay, well, that's probably not so bad to say that. Actually, a friend of mine who's in BPM told me, well, that's kind of like the little dirty secret of BPM. People don't like those kind of statements. Yes, we all know that. Well, actually, apparently nobody read that. But the principle was to say, robots, if you think again about that slide where we turn around the Chief Robotics Officer. Robots are centrals. They're not part of a chain, the process chain. They're not just there or there. They're everywhere. They're actually a correlation engine usually, and used as such. We were talking about the Internet of Things. Project that I've heard was, if you put sensors, IoT, everywhere in a house, the correlation engine is the robot that say, vacuum your floor. That's where the processing is. That's where everything can be related to. People working on those projects consider robot as central in everything, the process, the way the solution will be deployed, and everything. So the idea when you think about including RIOS, robots, into your processes, I was trying to build that thinking, okay, what if myself, I'm a BPM practitioner? What do you have to do? And the first thing that came into my mind was, I have to change the way I think about everything else. So first of all, robots is novelty. So a change to one organization impact. So I was giving the example of Amazon by bringing robots into the equation. So for supply chain purposes, you actually have to change many other things around. So when robots are part of the equation, don't just think about robots, think about everything around. Decision happen across network of people and system. I was talking about cobots. So it's basically the human-machine interaction, the human-robot interaction that will actually drive business. So I was talking about cobots. I was talking about the solution from SoftBank. Volatility, so RIOS presents an opportunity to reinvent process. You have to start from scratch. This is a machine that potentially didn't exist before that you will bring into your processes. So, well, good. Like instead of just integrating them, start again from scratch. Disruption, there's a lot of regulatory pressure and you probably heard all the regulation around drones, self-driving cars, that I consider robotics to some extent. Like you've seen with Google, they're not waiting until regulation change to actually come up with a solution. This is what most new vendors are doing, or people like Google on the other, when they acquire a company, they are not waiting for it to be possible. They're making it happen, and then they change the regulation. And obviously a complex scope, sorry. Yeah, I was saying it before, so robotics is changing business processes by touching every aspect of an organization, the way of an organization work, and smart machine, all the potential to replace human for cognitive work. So like here we're talking about a little more about artificial intelligence, but this is really like, again, the Pepper example, clearly just cognitive intelligence done by a robot, not anymore by a human. There's no human interaction into that. So if you take only two things away, actually, I hope you will take more than two. For what I know about BPM, there were a lot of methodologies, Six Sigma, Lean, everything. They're not enough anymore. You have to think about solutions that allow variation at scale. Again, and being able to sacrifice a little bit the level of orchestration, but not too much. And I was saying, and this is actually something that I see a lot with clients. When we start to talk about robots, they freak out. They freak out. Okay, so that's something agile by nature that is not completely coordinated with everything, that will evolve and move over time. How do you do that? Well, that's what is needed when you think business processes later to actually integrate robots into the equation. That's it. Thank you. And just to finish, if you guys are interested into robotics, I was just, again, trying to be very high level. It's difficult to bring all that, especially in front of you guys who are so good at BPM, and I'm not necessarily. A lot of things there. There's two events where me and my colleague will be talking. It's called Road Business in Europe or in actually Silicon Valley in September. We're also creating a Chief Robotics Officer club. Some of you are interested to talk about that. I'll be here, and if you have questions. It was, again, very difficult to compact everything into one small presentation. Hope it was interesting.